We continue to follow the situation in Afghanistan, a country that's once again under the control of the Taliban. Thousands of people here in the Bay Area are trying all they can to get their loved ones out of Afghanistan. This was the line outside Congress Eric Swalwell's office today in Castro Valley. His office is offering help with special immigrant visas to bring Afghans into the United States. Also trying to help is Jeff Lee, a public policy strategist and the former Deputy Cabinet Secretary and Director for External and International Affairs for Governor Jerry Brown. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today. So many people here in the Bay Area have family members in Afghanistan. There's a very, very large community of Afghans here. What are your ties?
Yeah, I'm originally from Southern California, but for me as a Vietnamese American, so much of, this experience, these horrible images and photos and videos of folks scrambling to get onto planes that are in the air, it definitely connects to me as a Vietnamese American. And my family being refugees and landing here as part of 120,000 Vietnamese who landed in, the United States and trying to live the American dream. I think certainly, many folks in my community, as well as broader Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, certainly feel connection to what Afghans are feeling right now. And certainly, where the Bay Area folks are with Fremont and Little Kabul, I think there's a connection that's feeling a lot of heartache and heartburn right now, given the Taliban taking over the country at this point.
Now, you've worked on infrastructure projects across 16 provinces in Afghanistan, as well as programs training female lawyers out there. You obviously have experience in the country there. What were your experiences like with the people of Afghanistan when you were working on those various projects?
What I've learned is the people who have the least always tend to give the most. And that was certainly the case with the Afghan people. I think, many of the villagers or community leaders were always so giving with their time and energy. And many of the folks that we worked with, certainly supporting international forces in the U.S. military, were deeply committed to a brighter and greater Afghanistan. Unfortunately, there were significant challenges in the operations in the field. There were regular attacks. There were significant disruptions in how our projects would go. There were regular firefights that unfortunately ensued. It was a very challenging environment. And, in the time I was there from 2010 to 2013, it seemed like every year was sort of feeling similar, maybe with a little bit of difference. And I think that was quite a challenge. It seemed like international forces had sort of a once a year brand new strategy in place. It was very difficult to execute. But at a human level, it was, some of the proudest work I got to work on, and friendships and staff that, I love near and dear, who unfortunately now are in a place of instability, in fear, and they're, sheltering in place, hoping to get an opportunity to escape and to be in a place of safety with their family and loved ones.
Now, the challenges that you say you faced there were obviously during a time where the Taliban was not in control. The group is now in control, so I'd only imagine challenges are going to grow larger. But what are some of your biggest concerns with Taliban, with that group in control now?
I mean, first and foremost, you need to be thinking about the women and children. Unfortunately, the Taliban has a track record of, being very much against the rights of women. I think that's well documented from their time in power from 96 to 2001, before the Americans intervened the first time after 9/11. The Taliban government has been trying to talk, with a more reformer agenda, talking about having a more inclusive government, having, women participate in society under the constraints of Sharia law. I think that's pretty rich. I think that's probably unlikely. It is in their interest, certainly, to try to court international community support so they can have economic ties, trade, and recognition of their government. And unfortunately, players like China and Russia are definitely trying to fill the vacuum that the United States is leaving by their departure. And certainly with neighbors like Iran and Pakistan, there's going to be a lot of challenges and opportunities for, the United States to engage. But it's going to be very difficult without a presence there to be able to, ensure that Afghanistan is not a place that's harboring terrorism and is respecting human rights, unfortunately.
Now, the U.S. spent the past 2 decades and $83 billion to train Afghan security forces that simply collapsed without really putting up any resistance, and essentially handed off all of American investments to the Taliban. What does this mean for the Taliban's firepower and its influence in the region, influence on possibly even surrounding countries?
Well, I mean, first, the United States and its allies were working to support and build capacity for a 300,000 strong army. And at least on paper, that was looking like it was a quite formidable force. But it was pretty clear that there were issues with capacity, issues with corruption, and frankly, a morale issue that was pretty significant, especially when you had food and water and resources in the field that were not getting to places where there were exercises of attacks and operations that were happening. I think there's going to be significant challenges for us to engage in the region. And just remember, you in South Asia, you have some players that have nuclear weapons, and you've got porous borders. There's going to be refugee crises that you'll have across the entire region. And you have, instances of climate change and other challenges. I think, unfortunately, given the Taliban having more firepower and weaponry and potentially international recognition from, some global players, I think it's going to be very difficult for the United States to have leverage and to be able to assert itself and really promote human rights and democracy at the center of its foreign policy that President Biden's been pushing.
I know when I was watching reports, there were some reports of, analysts were saying that the last 2 decades, the U.S. Was building an infrastructure that wasn't necessarily present in Afghanistan prior to, the U.S. kind of coming in and helping out, and that the Taliban just kind of sat back and almost waited for this to happen. Obviously, without speculating, we don't know what was going on in the minds of the Taliban fighters, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think one of the challenges here is, unfortunately, I think there was some writing on the wall, and I think losing the American presence definitely affected the psychology. And you have to understand, Afghan forces were so, conditioned and used to having air support, intelligence support, and capacity to be able to take on and share burden in fighting the conflicts in the field against the Taliban. And unfortunately, with the Americans departing and really shrinking its forces, as of last year to 2,500, it was going to be very hard for the Afghan military and forces that have the same unfortunate will here. The Taliban forces certainly were inspired by other, other acts and other opportunities. And, I think, certainly when you're looking at a life and death situation, I definitely can sympathize about what would happen if you felt overmatched or psychologically outmaneuvered.
Now, to avoid becoming a major humanitarian crisis, do you think there's anything the Biden administration could be doing? Obviously, we do know how, to some degree, we know how the Taliban operates in terms of, enforcing laws. They've been talking about promising certain freedoms for women that kind of fall in the norms of Islamic law, which is obviously a very fluid type of norm, depending on who's interpreting that law. But it's not just the women, it's all minority groups. Do you think this is a situation where a major humanitarian crisis can be avoided? And if so, what steps do you think should be taken to do so?
It's going to be very challenging to avoid a major humanitarian crisis without the support of the international community, without the support of regional players, and without the Americans taking a specific role in taking in as many Afghans who were our allies, our friends, and really took a leap on supporting our operations in the field for a better country. There's going to be required coordination here. The international community, multilateral organizations need to be doing their part to take in Afghan citizens, especially ones that were supportive of our values. That's going to be absolutely critical going forward here. And unfortunately, I think, given the border issues and frankly, some economic collapse that's going to be happening in the country, I don't see too much of a path, unfortunately. But again, I'm most concerned about the women and children here who will directly be affected in the most heinous and horrible ways. Forced marriages being one thing, public stonings likely as well. So we're talking something pretty putrid and terrible that is going to be coming. And unfortunately, on our watch, it's our responsibility, and we failed here.
Now, we feel relatively helpless here in the United States, but there are some ways that we can help. How are some of those ways that average Americans like you and I can kind of contribute to the cause?
Sure. Lutheran Social Services is doing great work in getting folks, settled here in the United States, right? We were having about 2,000 special immigrant visa holders coming in here. We should expect more, especially as more flights get out here. So I think that's going to be significant. You can contribute money to International Rescue Committee, the United Nations Refugee Agency, Refugees International. And I would say too, one key plug as well, making sure that you can reach out to, friends of yours that served in Afghanistan, service members. I think it's going to be a trying time, a relived trauma. So absolutely reaching out for Veterans Affairs Services, connecting with the PTSD hotline there with Veterans Crisis Line. I think those things are absolutely important. And the last thing, making sure that you can reach out to your members of Congress and supporting advocacy groups like Evacuate Our Allies and No One Left Behind. I think there's significant opportunities here to move the needle and let the White House and Congress know this is a priority to you here. I mean, just 25% of folks in a recent poll have said that, the withdrawal is going well. I suspect with continued pressure, that number will drop, and hopefully there'll be more action to ensure that, we put Afghans and their families away from harm and into safety.
All right. Well, Jeff Lee, we really appreciate you taking time to speak with us, and we'll have all that information available on our website at KRON4.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.